Order. I call this meeting to order. This is the Standing Committee on Community Services. My name is Susan Corkum-Greek. I am the MLA for Lunenburg and the chair of this committee. Welcome to our witnesses. Today we are going to hear from presenters regarding disability support transformation. We'd ask that folks either turn off their phones or put them on silent, and in the case of an emergency, please use the Granville Street exit and walk up to the Grand Parade. I'm now going to ask committee members to please introduce themselves, and I'll start on my left.
Brad McGowan, the MLA for Cold Harbour Dartmouth.
Tori Rushton, MLA Cumberland South, and welcome.
Hi everybody, Damien Stoylove from Bedford South.
Good morning, everyone. Diane Timmons from Victoria Lakes area. Thank you.
Ian Rankin, Timberley Prospect, he, him.
Good morning, Susan LeBlanc, MLA for Dartmouth North, and I use she, her pronouns.
Thank you, and I'd also like to note the presence of Legislative Counsel Philip Grassi and our Legislative Committee Clerk Tamer Nusaba. So again, the topic today is disability support transformation. A welcome to our witnesses. I'd like to begin. We'll perhaps start on my right and ask you each to introduce yourselves, and then we will revert to opening comments following that. So I recognize Laura Upton.
Good morning. My name is Laura Upton. I'm a Senior Executive Director with the Disability Support Program at the Department of Opportunities and Social Development.
Maria Medioli, Executive Director with the Disability Support Program, leading the implementation of the Human Rights Remedy.
Good morning. Craig Beaton, the Deputy Minister at Department of Opportunities and Social Development.
Good morning. I'm Stephanie Carver, and I'm here representing the Disability Rights Coalition of Nova Scotia.
Again, thank you all so much for being here this morning. And we'll begin with opening remarks, and I would recognize Deputy Beaton, please.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. As stated, I'm joined by Maria Medioli, Executive Director of the Disability Support Transformation, and Laura Upton, Executive Director of the Disability Support Service Delivery. Appreciate the opportunity to be here to speak to you today about the transformation of the Disability Support Program and the work underway of the Nova Scotia Human Rights Remedy. We are now entering year 4 of 5, and it's important to take a moment to reflect on where we are and how intentionally we've moved to get here. Over the past 3 years, our focus has really been on building the foundation for a completely new disability support system. It's a complex, system-wide change, and it is required and has required doing the hard and often unseen work first so that the system we are building is stable, sustainable, and truly centered on human rights. Over this period, we have built critical pieces that didn't exist in Nova Scotia. That includes the development and implementation of individualized funding, shifting decision-making and control to people themselves. It also includes the launch of a school leavers program, a proactive new approach that supports young people with disabilities before they graduate high school, helping prevent gaps in support as they enter adulthood. And it includes the introduction of Home Share, a new community-based living option that expands real choice and supports for people to live in shared homes with the right supports as part of their communities. In addition, we've established regional hubs, created new roles such as local area coordinators and intensive planning support coordinators, invested in service provider readiness through the Service Evolution Fund, and put in place the policies, workforce development strategy, and governance structures needed to support all of this change. None of these pieces stand alone. They are designed to work together, and it takes time to design them well, but also to put them in place. Because of this work, we are now at a turning point. As we move into years 4 and 5 of the remedy, we expect to see greater momentum and faster movement, Not because we are changing direction, but because the foundation is now largely in place. Plans can turn into action more quickly, transition can happen on a greater scale, and communities, service providers, and staff are increasingly ready to support people to live good lives in the places they choose. I want to be clear that this work has always been a marathon, not a sprint. Change of this magnitude takes patience, collaboration, and commitment. We are not making incremental adjustments. We are rebuilding an entire system at a scale that is unprecedented in Canada. We are focused on getting this right, not just getting it done. And as we move through the final 2 years of the remedy, you will continue to see those early investments come together with more people living in community with real choice, dignity, and support. Thank you, Madam Chair, and we look forward to today's discussion.
Thank you, Deputy Beaton. And I would now recognize Ms. Carver, please.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me to appear today before this committee. My name is Stephanie Carver, and I'm the chair of the Disability Rights Coalition. If I may, I would like to introduce the DRC, and then I'd like to tell you a little bit about why this is so important for me and my family. So the Disability Rights Coalition, the DRC, is an advocacy group made up of people with disabilities, their family members, friends, and allies. I think it's really important to understand that the DRC is an organization that has been advocating for the rights of Nova Scotians with disabilities for over 2 decades. Our first iteration was the Kendrick Coalition, which was formed in 2001 in response to the province's failure to implement the Kendrick Report. Prepared for government by Dr. Michael Kendrick, the report called for an end to the institutionalization of people with disabilities and the provision of essential supports to ensure full participation in society. When the government of the day chose to shelve that report, the diverse community that Dr. Kendrick had brought together through his work united to defend and advance its recommendations. Following Canada's ratification of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in 2010, we became the DRC, and we continued our advocacy. Around the same time, a joint community government task force was established to bring disability services in line with the convention. And in 2013, the province committed to its recommendations, called the Roadmap, to reduce reliance on institutions and build inclusive communities, with full implementation promised by 2023. Again, little progress was made. In 2014, the Disability Rights Coalition filed its landmark complaint with the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission, alleging systemic discrimination against persons with disabilities. This complaint was filed in conjunction with a case brought by 3 individuals who I would like to name here: Beth McLean, Sheila Livingston, and Joseph Delaney, who had been institutionalized or incarcerated in a locked psychiatric unit at the Nova Scotia Hospital, despite not requiring such care due to the province's failure to provide adequate community-based services. As you probably and hopefully know, on October 6, 2021, the Nova Scotia Court of Appeal made a finding of systemic discrimination against the province based on its treatment of persons with disabilities who are in need of supports and services to live in community. And in June 2023, the Human Rights Board of Inquiry approved the interim consent order and the 5-year implementation plan, which we know is the remedy. The role of the DRC at this time is that of a watchdog and of holding the government to account. And as party to the remedy, it's our role to support government, service providers, communities, and individuals and families to see what's possible and to build the inclusive communities envisioned in the remedy. It's incumbent on all of us to make the remedy a success. And if you could indulge me a little bit, I want to tell you a bit about myself and my family. I wear many hats, professionally and on a volunteer basis, but the one that brings me here to you today is that I'm a mother of 3 young men in their 20s, the youngest of whom, Peter, is the one that brings me to this work. Peter's funny, smart, thoughtful. He loves words and numbers. He is a music lover, and he loves being with people who are singing, well or not. He's a hiker. He enjoys being near water, and he very clearly expresses his appreciation for the beauty in nature. He's a soccer player, a basketball whiz, a bowler, and a swimmer. He is a volunteer at 2 public libraries here in HRM, and he's a well-recognized member of the Canada Game Centre. He thrives when he's busy and productive in a meaningful way, alongside others who are doing similar work. Peter also has autism, intellectual disability, communication disorder, ADHD, and a seizure disorder that is not yet managed. He will always need support, and he's constantly learning and growing. Like the rest of his family, he's a lifelong learner. He's 23, and he left the school system in June of 2024. The Nova Scotia Human Rights Remedy means that he's on a very different life path than he would have been otherwise. His is a future that's rooted in our belief that he belongs in community, in his community, in our community, not a community that is defined by the fact that he has a disability. He will learn and work in our community. He has a right to and a need for genuine relationships, love, and a sense of purpose. He can, with the right supports, dream of and plan for living an ordinary life just like his two older brothers. So what will that look like? It puts Peter, with the support of his family and friends, in the driver's seat. No longer will he be placed somewhere because his name came up on a wait list for a spot in a segregated program or a bed in a group home. Individualized planning means that Peter will have the same access to the opportunities that his brothers have to live regular, fulfilled lives. This could include perhaps having a job, enjoying a hobby, traveling, making friends, maybe finding a soulmate, having a real home of his own and of his own choosing, and contributing in a meaningful way to his community. It means that his life, his existence, will not be a life that's defined by the fact that he has a disability, but will be full of hope and possibility. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Ms. Carver. So we're going to move into the question and answer period. I will just remind our witnesses, if you can just wait a half a second for the red light to come on after I recognize you. We often experience people in their zeal for the work that they do and their advocacy for those they represent to want to jump right in there. But if you can watch for that, and if you miss it a couple of times, I'll just remind you, it's very simple. We will start with first round of questions. The NDP Caucus will have 20 minutes, followed by the Liberals having 10 minutes, and the PCs will have 30 minutes. And with that, I think I've got all my housekeeping looked after. I will recognize MLA LeBlanc.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for being here today for this important discussion. As the Deputy pointed out, we're over halfway through the remedy to end systemic discrimination of persons with disabilities. The Deputy mentioned that we are entering year 4 of 5, but we've missed some important milestones along this 5-year plan. Now, I am intrigued by the Deputy's opening comments about laying the foundations, but I'd like to hear more about that later. I'll have some specific questions. It seems, though, that missing some milestones, and instead of trying to make up the ground in the most recent budget, the government set out to slash tens of millions of dollars that support people with disabilities. $16 million was reversed, but cuts to the broader public service sector, the poverty reduction tax credit, and the hearing aid program still remain and will impact people with disabilities. So my first question is for Ms. Carver. Was the Disability Rights Coalition consulted either before the budget or before the reversal of some of the cuts that impacted people with disabilities?
I recognize Ms. Carver.
Thank you. So there has always been a disconnect between how government funds buildings and places rather than individuals and families. And it was our understanding, I'm not in government, so it was our understanding that the remedy funding itself was not impacted in the budget. We were deeply concerned that the cuts to culture and community organizations would negatively impact all of us, including people with disabilities in Nova Scotia. The DRC understands that in part of deinstitutionalization, which involves both where people sleep and where people spend their days, where do people find belonging and meaningful lives? And it's in community organizations. So that is where people with disabilities will find meaningful lives and belonging and connection in community. So the cuts to the arts sector, the cuts to any community organizations, we were deeply concerned about. We do separate the concerns around cuts to service providers from the funding for the remedy. But we really do support scaffolded transitions from individualized funding and planning so that every Nova Scotian with disability can take steps well supported into building good, ordinary lives in community. We definitely don't support pulling out the rug from anyone. And we also acknowledge there's a really big responsibility on service providers to understand and embrace the transformation in services. And we understand that it's more than just flipping the funding model. I'm not sure if all of you understand. So part of the disability transformation is that where service providers are block funded from above, government gives monies to service providers of all kinds. And basically, they're funded by head, by person. And so now part of the transformation is that the money is going to be in the hands of the people with disabilities themselves, and they get to decide how they spend that money. So that really needs to be done in a really careful and mindful way. So I'm not sure if that answers your question.
I recognize MLA LeBlanc.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it sounds like you weren't consulted, but about those specific cuts. I do want to talk about what you just said in a second. But I guess I'll just turn to Deputy Beaton then. If the Disability Rights Coalition wasn't consulted about how those cuts were to happen, I'm talking about specifically to people, like the programs that affect people with disabilities, though I am with you on all of the comments you made about the cuts to cultural organizations and community organizations. My question for the deputy is, how were the decisions made to make cuts to disability support programs and then reverse some of those cuts? So can you just take us through what happened there, please?
I recognize Deputy Beaton.
Yeah, thanks very much for the question. I think it's important to note that the budget for the remedy, in terms of the transformation of the remedy, was an increase of $180 million this year. There was no cut to any programs that are designed to support the remedy. As Ms. Carver has outlined, the block funding approach is one that is outlined in the remedy that is set to end, where the funding will actually go to the individual. And the recommendations, as we looked at our budgets and we look at where we were trying to make the least amount of impact on persons with disabilities, but more broadly across our entire OSD budget, it does outline that the operators of day programs, as an example, would be the ones eventually where their block funding will be rolled down, and that funding will go to persons with disabilities, specifically to manage their own individualized funding. Providers are well aware of this. It's outlined in the 5-year plan. So as part of our budget deliberations, recommendations were brought forward around that, and assuming that many people are going to be moving towards individualized funding. Clear that the community wasn't necessarily prepared for that, and we've taken that back to look at it in terms of how we can support day programs going forward as we roll into year 4 and 5 of the remedy.
Thank you. I recognize MLA LeBlanc.
Well, I guess, and I guess, I've met with a number of day programs. There's actually a number of them in Dartmouth North and beyond. And one of the issues, of course, is and completely support the idea of the transformation, but the idea of doing it carefully is really important, so that an organization that has a bunch of programs and staff loses all a chunk of their money, then they don't have the ability to offer those programs, so there's nothing for the person who has the individualized funding to access. So that is obviously the tricky part. So I'm wondering, in the reversal of the cuts, is that sort of the recognition? Because I know that those conversations have been going on with the department and the organization. So when you reversed some of those cuts, was that the realization that this was too much too soon, or how was that, what happened there?
I recognize Deputy Beaton.
Yeah, I think obviously there was great advocacy from the community around the concern around how quickly some of the cuts would have come forward. Yeah, I think government heard that and reinstated. I can say for myself, we visited a number of day programs. They do tremendous work. It's very beneficial to the participants, and they're aware of the changing model. Many had not been paying, in some cases, there's some that are working, many had not been paying, minimum wage, and a lot of them have moved towards that, which is outlined in the remedy as well. So I think it was a recognition that there is a little bit more planning that needs to be done to support, to make sure that not only the participants and the operators are ready for the financial change, but also the change management within community. And I think it's important to recognize that. So that was another reason that we took a second approach on it. A change like this is really difficult, and I will also add that we have some fairly world-renowned experts that had written the remedy, with Eddie Bartnick out of New Zealand and Tim Staten out of BC. We're in regular contact with them. They would tell you that a change like this, we are the last jurisdiction in the country to actually move to a process of making sure that persons with disabilities have the ability to live in community. Many other jurisdictions did it over decades. We're doing it over a 5-year period. And I think the recognition of how swift that change is does impact on service providers, who again do tremendous work, but the pace of which the change and the communication out into community is difficult. And that's why, even being here today to be able to present to the committee, communication is important. Not many Nova Scotians don't necessarily understand or know what's happening with the remedy unless they're directly impacted. So every opportunity we have to communicate is really important. And the pace of change of which we're moving, I think, is frightening to some. So the communication and being upfront and engaging. Maria does bi-weekly webinars with hundreds of service providers every week, and has been doing that for over 2 years to try and get communication out. So I think we have a good relationship with our service providers, and we communicate as much as we possibly can with them. But sometimes we can move a little too quick, and I think that was rectified as part of the budget process.
I recognize MLA LeBlanc.
Thank you. It's ironic that things are moving too quickly all of a sudden when things have been, when the Kendrick report was in 2001, and since I've been elected almost 10 years ago, this is the roadmap was being worked on or not being worked on. I mean, discussion's been going on since the early 2000s, so it's a shame now that we're finally getting somewhere with, by the way, the necessity of a human rights case brought against the province, that now we're getting here, and now it's too fast, too quickly. So unfortunately, I just wish that we had started this when the Kendrick report, or if this was called the Kendrick report, had first been tabled with that good work. I'll leave that there, though. So I just want to ask about housing now. So we're far behind the target of creating housing options for the people moving out of institutions. By March 2026, this government was supposed to have created a total of 340 home share spaces. To my knowledge, 0 had been created as of December 2025. So I'm curious about the new timeline for the requirement. When will Nova Scotians with disabilities have these housing options available to them?
I recognize Deputy Beaton.
I'm happy to start, but if you want specific details around home share, I'm okay to send it over to Maria if you're comfortable with that. So I would say, housing in general, obviously, government's done a significant amount of overhaul in terms of the housing supply, whether it's affordable housing, supportive housing. Our department has been, lockstep with Department of Housing on that in terms of increasing the number of accessible and adaptable units, but we do know that there is more housing required. As part of the remedy, however, one of the, we do get concern from people in the community around adequate housing to be able to move participants, particularly out of institutions, because that is the first phase. And I would say that no individual will be moved out of an institution until they have adequate housing. This goes back to the idea of we're not trying to move this just to do a checkbox on a timeline, but actually to do it in a way that's respectful and also warrants the requirements and the request of the individuals. Many people are living in certain areas of the community, but they choose that they may want to move to another part of the community. And our IPSCs, who have a caseload of only 20, so get to know their participants very, very well, and their families, to really understand what it is and what a good life looks like for a community. So no participant will be moved until we have adequate housing. That housing could be a home share, as you've mentioned, which we've just recently launched that program. It could also be, market housing where it's a rental with a roommate. It could be a backyard suite. There's a number of options. So it would be premature for us to go out and design accessible housing in certain communities without understanding where participants actually want to live. So for more information in terms of the home share specifically to your question, I would ask Maria to maybe jump in on that.
And I recognize E.D. Medioli.
Thank you. Thank you. I did want to just make an opening remark about housing writ large, because it often comes up in relation to the remedy. And the remedy is actually really specific, that it's not a placement-based approach, that we don't start with placement first and then figure out the rest. We start with planning, getting to know the person, and housing, of course, is part of that. And I think that's the mistake we made in the past. We'd create homes, small option homes, and then that was the option presented, often the only option. And so we're really trying to be intentional with the housing conversation, to get to know the person and then see what opportunities they are. In terms of home share, it's one of a number of new programs that were required under the remedy. So that involved designing the program, and we were very intentional with that work. Especially around the home share. There's lessons learned in other jurisdictions. We took that into account. We took into account Nova Scotia specific environmental conditions, and designed a program that I'm really quite proud of. And now it's designed, and we have what are called coordinating organizations, 10 coordinating organizations across the province who we fund, and they will operate home share on our behalf. So those organizations have now been identified, trained, and funded, and they are available to accept referrals for home share. The key, though, to home share is the matching. So it's, again, if somebody expresses an interest, a participant expresses an interest in home share, that's where the conversation starts in terms of what's important to you. How do you want to live your life? Would you like to live with somebody who's of a similar age, maybe faith or share a cultural background, and then finding a home share provider that meets those criteria. And then they have to get to know each other and decide if they both want to voluntarily participate in that process. So there is a lot of front-end work, and it's really important work, because if it's done properly, then the home share is a success. If it's not done properly, then you're forcing two people to live together, and it's not going to go well. So we are now ready to start accepting referrals. I think you might have seen our marketing campaign. We're trying to generate interest from people who would like to be a home share provider. And if you know anybody, please send them to homeshareNS.ca, because I think it's a great opportunity. And again, while there was a number of home shares, we aren't forcing anybody into home share. So I think the key is to have home share available for everybody who would like to be part of it. But in terms of a hard number, we wouldn't force anybody in. And we do now have several years to welcome people into home share. And I think the only other thing I would say is that where it does work, it works very well. There is lots of experience in other jurisdictions where it can be a really mutually beneficial, rich, relationship-based approach between both parties.
I recognize MLA LeBlanc.
I just want to ask Ms. Carver, was the Disability Rights Coalition consulted on the development of the home share program? And if so, when did the engagement happen? And are you satisfied with the level of engagement with the government on the home share program?
I recognize Ms. Carver.
The Disability Rights Coalition was part of the negotiation of the remedy and was at the table when writing out all the benchmarks that were there. So, in short, yes. The home share program is a program that exists in British Columbia and is received with extraordinary success there. Not without its bumps, like anything, but it's something that is very well known, and I would actually say quite successful in British Columbia, and is supported by the inclusion movement across the country. I think, if I may add to that, I think it's really important that this is to understand the importance of uncoupling support from housing. So in situations where people historically have been placed into a service provider's building, a place that's actually not their real home, it's really important that we understand the importance of uncoupling the support that people receive and the place where they live. That's where people are put at risk in many ways, and often at risk of losing where they live. So that is going to be something that's really important for us to keep an eye on going forward, and the DRC is really keeping an eye on that as well. This is new, right? Like, this is the idea of not just kind of plunking a person into a spot is a new notion for Nova Scotians. It's not new in other jurisdictions across the country, and it's not new in other jurisdictions internationally. We think it's really important that this is done well. I mean, in any situation, if I'm going to move in with somebody, I want to know it's going to be a good fit. I don't want you just to take my name and plunk me into a spot. If you move in with somebody, you want to make sure it's going to be a good fit. So we appreciate that while we're not rushing through and we're not checking boxes, that it's really important that we have good quality, person-centered living experiences for people with disabilities.
I recognize MLA LeBlanc with 2 minutes.
Okay, so during the budget session, we heard from a number of families who were taking care of their adult children in their homes. Carrie Robertson told us that she made the decision to care for her adult son in her home for as long as she could, but acknowledged that it's getting harder and more expensive to keep that up. Will these families be eligible for any financial compensation through the new home share program? Initially, the program announced that families wouldn't be eligible, and so but the program wasn't finalized, and so I'm just wondering if that has changed or where we are with that situation.
I recognize E.D. Medioli.
Home share is not intended for a family arrangement, but under individualized funding, there will be additional support available for families. So that's really part of the work. We're collapsing all of our existing programs, including Flex at Home, which is probably the program that the family you're speaking of is accessing, and they will be eligible for the new approach to individualized funding, which is much more comprehensive. But home share, for a whole variety of reasons, is for related family members.
I recognize MLA LeBlanc with 45 seconds.
Okay. I guess this is not on my notes. So I'm going to say, home share sounds great, and I hope that it will get up and running. And I understand the idea that, no one wants to be plunked somewhere, and the matches have to be good. But for the people who home share is not good for, where are we with housing in general? Again, I want to go back to that first question, because home share will be right for some people, but not for other people, as we know. So, and yes, we've got lots of things going on in housing, but what about specific housing for choices for people with disabilities?
Unfortunately, it's time. So we'll move on to MLA Rankin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for being here on an important topic today. I do want to talk about the last budget just a little bit on the cuts and then the subsequent reversal of those cuts, especially in the context of looking forward to next year. So we have in the budget the forecast of the same scale of cuts, looking at a cumulative reduction of $600 million. So we know that some of those reversals went through and were reinstated before, literally hours before folks from Easter Seals and other organizations were about to protest outside the House with an apology from the Premier. Today, I think, is an opportunity that we can give some reassurance to folks that have some anxiety and worry about what's to come next year. So my first question is, what assurances can the department give to families and essential supports specific to day programs and respite care to make sure that they won't be impacted in this next budget that will come out next year?
I recognize Deputy Beaton.
Yeah, thanks very much for the question. And I think I just would go back to what I had said earlier and want to reiterate. In terms of the rollout of the remedy, I think families should be comforted with the fact that this is a historic investment that government's been put in over the last number of years. I think the first year was $90 million. It was an additional $120 the next year and $180 this year. And we will go through the budget cycle as we normally do and make recommendations to government. And those deliberations, actually start relatively soon in terms of how a budget is built. So The other aspect that I would say in terms of respite care, we do know that even in this budget cycle, respite care, particularly for children with young or families with young children, there was a 20% increase in our direct family support program that also, adds an additional 20% to respite care for families, which equates to about $800 a month. We know that there's lots of work to do here in terms of supporting individuals. We work pretty closely with, groups like Inclusion Nova Scotia and take their advice. Maria and Laura, we constantly meeting. We had a meeting specifically recently with a group of families talking about their concerns and trying to support those. So those pieces will be built as part of our budget as we move forward into the next fiscal year. But we do anticipate, and government signed on to a 5-year commitment on the remedy, and with that, they've been backing it with the financial commitment each year over the last 5 years. So I guess the assurances I would give is that that funding has never wavered. There's been a strong commitment from the province to support the remedy, and the signals are that we anticipate that going forward.
I recognize MLA Rankin.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And, the remedy and the importance around the flow through going to the client is an important one that we should all be focused on. But we are hearing from some families that are seeing a bit of a disconnect and unsure what to prepare for once the remedy is implemented. And, we hear the department is going to be going even faster over the next couple of years. But the government is actually reducing their overall spend in the next budget. So by changing who organizes the flow of money shouldn't result in a reduction, in a net reduction. So we hear from a mother whose daughter, after years of isolation, finally found belonging in community through a day program, and they are worried about it being at risk. So can the department provide assurance to this family that their daughter's programming and lifestyle will remain intact?
I recognize Deputy Beaton.
So I can start and maybe flip it over to Maria if you're comfortable with that. But, day programs, as I mentioned, are going to be an essential part of moving forward with the remedy. The model in terms of how day programs will be delivered will shift from an organization relying solely on block funding, as Ms. Carver had outlined in her opening comments, to a more approach where individuals get to choose. And they may choose the day program, but they may choose volunteering. They may choose a number of things. Our service providers that are in the day programs are well aware of those changes and actually support it because they do support the remedy, and they're working on ways that they can adopt their models to be able to support that. That includes things like a service evolution fund that we've instituted, which is over $1 million a year that we provide to service providers to be able to adapt and change the way that their business model is going to look in the future. We recognize that sometimes, and I'll use an analogy from a former colleague, we might have got a little far out over our headlights on this one in terms of trying to drive the change really quickly and listening to families in terms of supporting the day programs. We take that, we accept that. Government reinstituted the funding, and we'll look at how best we can move forward. The key on the remedy for the first 5 years is really deinstitutionalize participants, so moving participants out of institutions. Right now, we currently have between 75 and 77% of participants that are currently in an institution that are either transitioned or in the process of transitioning. And the process of transitioning means meeting with a local area coordinator. In these cases, it would be an intensive planning and support coordinator, which I mentioned they have a caseload of 20. There's a lot of inputs that go in and out of that. Meeting with families, talking about what a good life looks for you in community. That can take up to 6, 8, 12 months, potentially, depending on the participant and where they're moving. So the real focus for the first 5 years is on moving those individuals. There will be opportunities to engage post 5 years. So there is a bit of a coordination of timelines. So some of the families that you're talking about where participants are living at home, their impacts will be further down the road in terms of individualized funding. So we recognize that there is a bit of a scale here that we have to look at from a timing perspective with individualized funding, and supporting day programs will be part of that. And that was, some of the impetus for making those changes. Did you want Maria or you? Okay. Sure.
I recognize MLA Rankin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just want to try to get some certainty around groups like Horizon Achievements, who I visited, Prescott group that really provide key services for those kind of day programs. And they don't have core funding, so they have to try to apply every year for programs. And this speaks to the capacity that's needed. My colleague touched on this, but really important for rural communities so that there's programs that do exist in the long term. Because they spend a lot of time writing for grants every year. they need predictability on what their staff looks like in future years. So how can the department give real certainty that there will be some kind of level of core funding, and maybe that's the Service Evolution Fund, but predictable, dependable funding annually moving forward in the long term?
I recognize Edie Medioli.
Sure. Well, first of all, I think we all want our service providers to be strong because they're an important component of the remedy. And of course, we work with them in a whole variety of ways to ensure their ongoing financial stability. I did want to clarify, just because you mentioned two organizations, Prescott and Horizon, both of whom do receive core funding. They receive quite a substantial core grant. Well, I can't, predict beyond a budget cycle, but currently they receive a grant, quite a substantial grant, and applying for those other grants would be sort of on top of what we currently provide. But in the long term, we are moving to individualized funding. We're working to develop a formula in terms of how that transition happens for organizations, but they will be funded through individualized funding.
I recognize MLA Rankin with 2 minutes.
So is the government intent to eliminate all core funding for the centres and entirely replace it by individual funding? And if that's the case, how do you ensure that these centres will remain open, particularly in areas that you might have a dearth of support for individuals?
I recognize Edie Medioli.
So there's work currently underway to finalize the transition in the IF formula, and service providers are part of that. They were part of a working group with representation from day programs, residential providers, et cetera, and that work is ongoing. So the final formula may have a component of fixed funding. We're still working through that. But right now, anybody who accepts somebody with individualized funding, they are receiving administrative funding on top of that. So they're receiving their core funding and admin funding on top.
I recognize MLA Rankin with 1 minute.
1 minute, okay. Is there any jurisdictions that you're following that has like a gold standard model that you can balance those two to ensure you do have core funding or a level of core funding to ensure? I heard BC mentioned, but maybe there's a jurisdiction we're following.
I recognize Deputy Beaton.
So I think the benefit of, there's pros and cons of being the last jurisdiction to roll this out, and one of them is the fact that we actually get to learn from the mistakes of others. And, I mentioned the two experts that we rely on quite heavily. One is from BC, so we do look at the BC model quite extensively, but we also look at international models and, that Eddie brings to us. So particularly in Canada, I think what we're learning is that, the approach that we've kind of rolled out here is a best practice based on some of the gaps and the failures of those that have gone before us.
I recognize MLA Rankin with 20 seconds.
I don't think I'll get another quick snapper in, so I just want to thank you for your answers. Another round after, thanks.
Thank you. We'll move to the PC caucus, and I recognize MLA Stoylov.
Thank you all. And question that has been spoken about a bit here, but I was just wondering, Deputy Beaton, there's been criticism, that the remedy has been, slow to roll out, and I think you've alluded to some of them. But I guess if you can just summarize for us, like, what do you say to that criticism? And moving forward, what have you learned that we can now move forward with so that we can achieve our targets?
Recognize Deputy Beaton.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think I referenced it in the opening comments. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And even though 5 years seems like a long time, it's also pretty compressed. And our experts would say that when they had written the report. I think the 5-year timeline, even though I think people are anxious to see this change, we want to try to make sure that we do get it right. I would say that it's also not a linear line. So, this is it's kind of like a spaghetti noodle on the wall, right? It's not just you do one step, you get to the next. There are so many building pieces. We talk about the foundations. It does sound like sort of like the backroom stuff that had to be done, but we're talking about, redefining job descriptions, completely creating new job descriptions, keeping a current system running because we're still accepting applications while we're modifying and moving into a new one. Those changes take time. We've added over 150 staff as part of this process. And some elements have taken longer than we originally hoped, particularly where the change is complex and where it's deeply entrenched. So the change management around this has also not been, sort of particularly easy. We have systems that have been set in place for a very long time, and changing those systems, not only for providers, but also for families and those that are feeling like there may be some anxiety around having a participant or a loved one that's in a stable environment move out into a community-based setting where there's a lot of unknowns. So there is a huge amount of complexity in terms of changing sort of the narrative around on that. So I think I'll end it there. Did you have something do you want to add to that?
Sure.
Yeah.
I recognize E.D. Medioli.
Thank you. It's interesting because when we finalized the remedy with the Disability Rights Coalition and this question of timeline came up, I think on the one hand, the Disability Rights Coalition would say 1 day is too long to continue with the discrimination. And I think Eddie and Tim, the experts, tried to come up with a very ambitious timeline, but that they felt could be safely done, and that was 5 years. And the milestones that we talk about it's a plan, along the way, but the key is really to get there at the end of 5 years. That's the ultimate test if those 4 grounds of discrimination have been addressed. And so, it's complicated. We're maintaining the existing system while we build the new system. So we're running 2 systems. There's a huge cultural shift, even for myself, I have to say, every day I'm peeling the onion and I'm learning something new about the assumptions that we hold in terms of ableism and our opinions and feelings and emotions around persons with disabilities. So there's a huge cultural change. And it's just complicated in terms of things we might not have thought of because we're starting from scratch, whether it's individualized funding, whether it's setting up allied health teams, whether it's, closing institutions. These are all things we haven't done. So we are figuring it out as we go. But again, I think to echo what the deputy had said earlier, and if you look at the remedy, the first 3 years are the heavy lift in terms of creating the new positions, in terms of creating the new programs. In year 4, which is what we're entering, is really letting those things percolate and settle and perfecting them, doing a lot of continuous improvement and learning, but also letting those things happen, letting home share happen, letting school leavers happen, and really starting to see the benefits.
Thank you. I recognize MLA Storlev.
Thank you. Next question, I'd like to hear from Ms. Upton, if there's any success stories you could share so far with folks that have come from an institution into the community. Certainly like to hear them.
I recognize E.D. Upton.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for the question. Yeah, we're already starting to hear some lovely success stories of people who've been living in institutions for a long time who are now moving into community. And the stories we're hearing aren't necessarily big dramatic changes, but some of the smaller things that those of us at this table may not think of. People are recognizing or telling us that they appreciate some of the small things like being able to make a piece of toast or some coffee in their own place, having a choice over what groceries they buy, being able to do their own laundry, having friends and family be able to come and visit them. These may not seem like huge transformational things for us, but for people who've spent a large majority of their lives in institutions, this represents independence and dignity and autonomy about their lives. We're also hearing that people appreciate being truly known. That planning process that my colleagues have talked about is really key to that. People feel truly known, and the services they're receiving are designed specifically for themselves rather than a service-driven system where people are being asked to fit into something that's already existing. They're really receiving supports that are truly tailored to their own needs.
I recognize MLA Rushton.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, everybody, for being here. So I'd like to start with E.D. Medioli. Heard you speak publicly about employment opportunities and new positions being created. Wondered if you can update how many, I think I heard the deputy say a number, but just verify how many have been created. What are the job positions that they're doing and how effective is that being, and sort of break that down for us.
Sure.
Recognize E.D. Medioli.
So excited, apologies, you got
I
me
have the
going.
opportunity to know how passionate Maria Medioli is about her subject matter, so this does
I
not
do it
surprise me.
Every time, I'm sorry. So we were very fortunate to have a significant commitment from this government. We were approved for over 160 new FTEs or positions to support the implementation of the remedy, the vast majority of which are really frontline positions. So we created, and we have now, it changes every day because it's a lot of staffing, positions come and go, but we have filled all of the positions that we were approved for. And that includes intensive planning and support coordinators. So those are the frontline planners that work with people leaving institutions and those with significant support needs. And they would have a caseload of 1 to 20. So that is outstanding in terms of being able to be intentional and build a relationship with people and get to know them. We also have created local area coordinator positions. So those are people who are embedded in community and really know their local community, and will support the vast majority of people in DSP and also who aren't in DSP. Those who self-identify as having a disability, they won't have to come into the system. They can be supported by local area coordinators in their community. And again, it's meant to not just be about service. It's really about connection, making though, you probably all know a local area coordinator in your community. It's probably that unpaid person that everybody goes to because they know everything, an elder or a senior or whoever. That's the kind of role a local area coordinator plays to connect people with natural supports just like everybody else. Then we have eligibility, funding, and assessment coordinators, and the remedy, intentionally separated out funding decisions from planning. And so the eligibility, funding, and assessment coordinators, that's their focus, determining eligibility for funding and determining what support level the individual has. We also have community living facilitators, one in each region, and they're in community identifying what resources there are to support people and or seeing if there's opportunities to leverage existing resources and create new opportunities so that people with disabilities can access those supports. We've also created facility closure specialists. So these are individuals devoted to supporting the closure of the facilities. And in the past, we had closed another institution in 2023, but it was off the side of people's desks. And I think the remedy acknowledged that this is a full-time job. And then we've also created some new positions around allied health. And this is, again, because a lot of the individuals and institutions received their allied health, so that's like physio and speech and those sorts of things. They received them in the institution. So if we're closing the institutions, we need to provide them in community. And they need to understand people with disabilities and their particular support needs. I think there's more positions. That's just off the top of my head.
I recognize MLA Rushton.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. And so I'd like to move over to the deputy for a little bit. And obviously, this is a large transition, as you've indicated. But obviously, OSD is not the only partner here, and we see Ms. Carver representing one partner. Could you sort of outline who some of the other partners are playing? And also, I know there's other departments within government that are playing a role here as well. So how are you being responsible and accountable for the progress to the partners as well as across government and the community?
I recognize Deputy Beaton.
Sure. Thanks very much for the question. You're correct. There's many people that are involved. The DRC obviously is a key participant in this process. We likewise, I think I mentioned Inclusion Nova Scotia. They also are a good partner of ours. But I would say the entire sector, honestly. The groups that I meet, whether it's day program operators, whether it's the larger institutions like DANCE, that's represented by DANCE, everybody's bought on to the idea of the remedy. I think it's been mentioned. It's been probably far too long waiting for this change, and everybody is on the same page in terms of the need. I think the how we get there is where there's open for interpretation and lots of opportunity to discuss. And I would point out that those that are working in the sector, whether it's the large institutions, oftentimes we talk about them and it's a bit villainized, but they are absolutely on board. And when you visit them, you realize that they are doing their best to work with those participants in a way that they are valued and that it's caring. And the staff, when you walk into those, they really do have great relationships with the individuals living in an institution and want to see them thrive in community. Beyond just partners in the sector, it is a government approach to this. We have a number of governance structures set in place where we report right through into a deputies committee that is represented by a number of individuals across the spectrum of government, including justice, addictions and mental health, Department of Health as an example, education. We have a remedy roundtable that is chaired by the Deputy of the Public Service that represents, not only government members but also folks that come from, NSH and other community-based partners, all of which have a role to play in supporting the historic discrimination of persons with disabilities. So there's a number of checks and balances there and a number of working groups. So it's, as I mentioned earlier, it's fairly complex, and there's a number of areas that we can work in to better improve, and I think those are well underway.
I recognize MLA Timmons.
Thank you, Chair. This question's for Medioli. Oh, thank you. Thank you for that. It's the first time meeting you as well. So thank you and welcome. I'm glad we're here to discuss this important issue. Transformation, I want to discuss housing. I know you mentioned the transition of the housing. And you mentioned some numbers, but I'm just wondering if you can clarify on the numbers of individuals with a physical disability, and how would you look at assisting in transformation of the share home program as well?
I recognize Edie Medioli.
Thank you for that question. I think, the disability support program supports a variety of different disabilities. So sometimes there is maybe the idea that everybody has a physical disability who we support, and it's actually quite a small percentage of individuals whose primary disability is a physical disability. So I do want to get that out there, that not everybody requires accessible housing. And there is a fair amount of accessible housing out there. And it's not just, now, for example, the province currently funds and licenses over 300 small option homes, many of which are accessible. So that is a potential option in the future. But there's also on the regular market, many buildings have accessible units, for example. And sometimes they might require a modification to make them accessible. We've done that as well. So I think there's a variety of options. I think it really comes back to the good planning. And so it starts with the individual and how we can support them in their unique circumstances. Where we always get into trouble is when we start and say, okay, we're going to build all these houses and people need to move there. We've made that mistake in the past, and we've either forced people into arrangements or, they've ended up on the wait list. So I think there's that piece. I'm trying to remember the second part in terms of home share.
Yes, if there's any option, if they...
Yeah. Sorry, I recognize MLA Timmons.
I should have known better. For individuals that are looking at transforming their home, if they are joining with someone that has a physical disability as well, is there some opportunities or funding there for that?
I recognize Edie Medioli.
Thank you. And I actually wanted to circle back on the housing, just to give you an idea. I think, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I know that independent living support has increased. I think it was 400 individuals maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and now we're up to almost 1,200. So that represents finding housing for over 800 people through those years. So it is doable. I'm not saying it's the easiest part, but I would say that the more challenging part is actually the robust planning and preparing people for a transition. Housing is part of that, but it isn't the greatest challenge. We've been able to do that. Back to the home share, again, it's really based on the individual, and if there were accessibility requirements in order for a home share to be successful, we could support that.
I recognize MLA Timmons.
Next question for you. What would you say the biggest threat to the Renemy implementation?
I recognize E.D. Medioli.
I would say, and this is from Eddie Bartnick, the expert who wrote the remedy, who still continues to support the implementation. He has told us that the biggest threat to these types of transformations really are loss of momentum over time. He's seen it over and over again, where people get excited at the beginning, a lot of effort goes in, and then I don't know if it's a determination, the commitment, different priorities, the momentum wanes. And he has been very encouraging in terms of he feels like we're actually gaining momentum, that is actually different than most experiences, that we continue, we're building, we've pretty well got things built where there's no turning back. We may make adjustments as we go, but overall that probably is the biggest challenge, and I would say probably the cultural change. It's just a lot for people to get their heads around in terms of we've done things one way for a long, long time, and just trying to imagine different. I mean, I acknowledge for families it's hard to imagine different. We've offered one choice usually. That's not a choice. We've offered one thing, and they haven't had a lot of choice in that. And so, getting your head around imagining different, dreaming different, for everybody, not just families, service providers, community, government, it is a lot to imagine something that we've never done before.
I recognize MLA Timmons.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to the further conversation and see the development of this. I'm going to pass it on to my colleague, Brad.
I recognize Emily McGowan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, each of you, for being here for this important conversation. I'd like to direct my first question to the Deputy Minister. What happens if we don't deliver on all the requirements of the remedy? And if any other members of your team would like to chime in on that as well.
I recognize Deputy Beaton.
Well, I think there's, the remedy was court-ordered. It was legal obligation from the courts to the department. So, and the other participant in that was obviously the DRC. So there would be an option to review and see whether or not we've actually committed to the remedy and remedied the discrimination of persons with disabilities over the 5-year period. The options would obviously be to bring back to the courts to say that we've not been able to do that. However, I think what we've talked about earlier is it's really about a shift and a shift in the way that we're working. I think the latest progress monitor report that we've tabled did outline that we were gaining traction. I think Maria just mentioned that. So, we do have a report to an independent progress monitor that outlines, how effective we are in the previous years, and we adjust based on that, and we have conversations with the DRC, and we meet with them around where they think that we're falling short, and we try to outline maybe some of the reasons for why that is, and we rectify and we change. But I really think I think the way that it's set up right now, we'll see significant progress in the next number of years in terms of moving people out from institutions, but also beyond just the movement of people, it's really about a cultural shift. And I think that's what you're seeing, which is why the education and awareness is so important. A cultural shift of society realizing that persons with disabilities, they deserve the same dignity and respect and the ability to live meaningful lives in community, and that's an adjustment from what we've seen previously with moving people in institutions. And I think you heard Ms. Carver talk passionately about her own example, and we have thousands of people across the province that experience that. And previous meetings that we've had with families, you can see the passion, you can see the excitement, you can see the fear, but you also see the hope that they have for their loved ones that they may not have seen that 10 years ago. But now they actually see that their children are going to be able to live meaningful lives in community to the way that they choose and how they decide. And I think that, I'm not a parent with a child with a disability, but I'm sure that that's comforting to them.
I recognize MLA McGowan.
So the next question is for Ms. Carver, and I want to thank you for sharing part of Peter's story, reminding us why we're working so hard towards the remedy, because Peter and all Nova Scotians with disabilities deserve no less. So my question is, the remedy is built on the idea that responsibility is shared across government, shared providers, communities, and advocates, including the DRC. From your perspective, what does shared responsibility look like in practice, and where is it working well?
I recognize Ms. Carver.
It's a big question. Thank you so much for that question. The onus is on all Nova Scotians. This is not just a system shift or a shift in government services. This is a cultural shift. When we talk about the notion that people with disabilities can only find belonging and meaningful lives in a segregated situation, that's an institutionalized mindset. It's a mindset that we all have a responsibility to look at, acknowledge, and change. So whose responsibility is it? All Nova Scotians. I want to echo Deputy Beaton's comments about the remedy roundtable. It concerns the DRC when we talk about the only responsibility being in the Department of Opportunities and Social Development, that in its sense it kind of segregates and says, well, if you have a disability, you only belong to this department. The finding of systemic discrimination was on the entire province of Nova Scotia and all departments of government. That remedy roundtable for us is of great importance and significance, and I would like to imagine that all departments are having conversations about how they can make sure that their grant programs, that all services that fall within each of their departments are ensuring that they are welcoming and including people with disabilities, because it's not just about opportunities and social development. That is where a lot of it lands, but that remedy roundtable to us is really important. Municipalities as well, that's where people find belonging. If you want to go play pickleball, if you want to take an art class, if you want to get a job, it's in your local community. So the responsibility is on employers, community members, municipalities, any kind of system. I think that I want to circle back to the notion that families, if I may, have been told from the day their child was born or diagnosed that if your child has a disability, you belong over here. We have special places for you. We have special places for your child. If you are somebody who has an adult child with a disability who's over the age of 40, you were probably told, and I have a good friend or many friends who were told, the best thing you can do is just put them into an institution and don't visit. And families have been told through school, when they leave school, the best thing you can do is just accept a segregated model. So of course families are terrified because they've always been told that your child belongs over here. You have one option, to get on a wait list to go to that. So I think that we really need to have compassion for families and for people with disabilities to break out of this notion that we need special places, we need bricks and mortar, we need special places for special people. We need to think about, if we really believe that our communities are inclusive, the onus is on all of us to shake up that notion that we have that there are special places for special people, because what happens is, if we segregate people with disabilities over here, that lets the rest of us off the hook. That lets the rest of us off the hook from going, it's my job to make sure that you have a job, to make sure that you have place in my community, that when you walk down the street, and maybe you look lost, that I reach out to you and then I have a conversation with you. The onus is on all Nova Scotians, all systems in Nova Scotia, and it also means that we need to look ourselves in the mirror and make sure that we ask ourselves a question, that if we believe that people with disabilities belong over there together, we have to ask ourselves what that really means and what that says about us as Nova Scotians. So I don't know if that answers your question.
I recognize MLA McGowan.
And so again, I thank you for that. So Ms. Carver, you bring both lived experience as a parent and advocacy perspective through the DRC. From where you sit, what part of the system feels like they are improving for families, and where do families still feel the strain?
I recognize Ms. Carver.
I think I kind of started answering that. I don't know that families themselves are necessarily feeling it, that all families are feeling it. There's kind of different buckets of families when I think about the family experience. There's the families of, have adults with disabilities who have lived in institutions their entire lives, and they and their loved ones have, in fact, been discriminated against terribly. I think there's families of individuals who have loved ones living at home and have chosen that, and they're concerned, obviously. Those are families who are literally scared of dying because they don't know what's going to happen with their loved one. That certainly would be my family. There's families of youth who are still in high school, and I've often said to people, I really am envious of those families whose kids are growing up and they're going to have a very different future. So I think that families who have the opportunity to connect with organizations and with other families who somehow have been able to find hope, who have been exposed to other ways of thinking, other ways of doing things. I think that those families connecting together with families who are model families or who are families who are like walking the same path, have the same vision, I think that they feel hope. I know certainly through my connection with Inclusion Nova Scotia, which Deputy Beaton has mentioned, that was a lifesaver for my family, and the opportunity to connect with other families who have similar visions. I think that, again, I'll just reiterate what families need support in order to support their loved ones. Families need support to understand that we have been told that there's a certain way of doing things for people with disabilities, and they need support to say, we've got you. Those dreams that you had, that little voice in your head from long, long ago that said you wanted the world for your child, that voice can now sing. And we're there for you to do that. So I think that that's really, really important. I have great compassion and understanding for families who are full of skepticism and doubt. I told you at the beginning of all the different advocacy efforts that families have. I stand on their shoulders. My son will benefit from their efforts, and those children who are 5 years old and just starting in the school system, they will benefit from those efforts. I think that it's going to be really important that we have some opportunities for innovation when families come forward and say, well, here's how we'd kind of like to work on supporting our loved one and our loved one leading the way. We have things that are like written in stone or written on paper in words, but I think that we have to be able to say, well, there might be different ways of doing things. We're constantly evolving, and so you might have a family who comes forward and goes, well, here's how we'd like to do it in a way that really honors the autonomy of our loved one, and that we need to be able to go with that and to accept that and support that and try things out. I think that in terms of services, flipping what service looks like completely upside down is going to be a really big thing for all of us to do. The notion that a person needs to go to a special place, they'll still need services, but it's not necessarily going to a special place for special people. It's like, well, what kind of supports do you need in order to live a regular life? We all need supports to live our regular lives, right? We have apps, we have people who clean our homes if we're lucky, people who walk our dogs, people who fix our fireplace or whatever. So we all need supports and services, and it's no different for people with disabilities. It's just we've made it special. So I don't know that all families are feeling it yet. I think families are terrified, and I deeply appreciate that. And the DRC really calls for support on that.
I'm so sorry, that's time.
Sorry about that.
No, you needn't be sorry. You've actually painted a very beautiful and empowering picture in those comments, I think. We will take, we have about a half an hour, leaving us some time for some additional committee business. So we will be proceeding with 7.5 minutes for each of the opposition parties and 15 minutes for the PC caucus. And I would recognize MLA LeBlanc.
Thank you very much. Yeah, really appreciate all of the conversation so far. I'm just going to ask a couple of quick questions since my time is very limited. So I do want to go back to housing for a moment. In your comments, Edie Medioli, you talked about that there's a fair amount of accessible housing in the community now, but Michael Prince, who's the independent monitor on the remedy, found that at the end of year 2, there had actually been 52 more young people that had been admitted to long-term care facilities. And that's moving in the opposite direction of what the remedy is supposed to accomplish in terms of no new admissions to facilities. So I'm wondering, I guess I'm going to ask Ms. Carver, what do you see, or do you have a sort of a thought on what's contributing to that? And to the department, when does the department expect to see no new admissions to long-term care homes for people with disabilities under the age of 65? So I'd like to ask Ms. Carver first and then go to the department.
I recognize Ms. Carver.
Can I ask for clarification, please? So you're asking about youth being admitted?
So people
I recognize MLA LeBlanc.
under the age of 65. So people who are younger who are going into long-term care facilities because they need care, but there's no place that they can live safely with, except for a long-term care facility. We heard a lot about this from the Disability Rights Coalition in the last several years, like connected to the roadmap as well.
I recognize Ms. Carver.
So thank you for the clarification and for the question. We certainly are looking forward to the year 3 report on that. We're at the end of this month. We're going to have a report on where the admissions stand on year 3. I would echo the sentiments stated earlier by Deputy Beaton. One day in an institution is one day too long. And our understanding is there have been no new admissions in the past year. You'll have to speak to the experts on that, about that. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. I'm sorry.
I recognize MLA LeBlanc. Is that?
Yeah, well, the question was, what do you see contributing to that? So, once the remedy was beginning, and then in year 2, we saw 52 new admissions, which I find as a shocking number, actually. So I'm just wondering if you have any insight into what's contributing to that, and then I'd love to hear from the department.
I recognize Ms. Carver.
It is hard for the Disability Rights Coalition to know what is contributing to individual cases of being admitted into institutions. I don't want to put out there any kind of assumptions about what that might be about, but I will just reiterate that one day in an institution is one day too long. And I'm glad that you're concerned about that, because I think that one of the things that the remedy has done for us is for us all to kind of shine a light on the harms of institutionalization.
I recognize Edie Medioli.
Thank you. So just to level set a little bit, there's about 450 people under 65 in nursing homes today. Not all of those individuals would be supported by the Disability Support Program. If their primary support need is dementia-related, that would not be appropriate for DSP. But we have to acknowledge that in the past there was a policy that was a barrier to individuals coming into DSP, and the only option that was left was a nursing home. So that was our eligibility policy 9.3 and 9.4 that essentially said if your behavioral or medical support needs exceed what DSP can provide, you're ineligible. So people were made ineligible, and that's how they ended up in a nursing home. That has been rescinded, for one thing. Secondly, we have a draft of a new admissions policy for nursing homes that we can't stop all new admissions because nursing homes aren't closing, but essentially it indicates that they have to access DSP first as an option before a young person would be considered. And we have that draft policy. It's actually with the Disability Rights Coalition for review and feedback. And I wanted to touch on that because you had asked about collaboration with the DRC. And I would say there's a lot of collaboration. Just that's an example where we've developed a draft policy and we're seeking their feedback. We developed a policy and a procedure on plain language. Another example, it's with the DRC for review and feedback. So we meet regularly with them, both to get feedback, but they also have a lot of questions, which is fair enough in terms of why did we do a certain thing and why didn't we. But also back to your question about year 2, why there were admissions. I think if you read the report, we were still hiring staff. It's intense planning and support coordinators who work with individuals in nursing homes to support their move out. And now that they're in place, we have moved 12 individuals out of a nursing home into DSP. We have another 11 that are in planning. And we have a series, we're going to go around every nursing home in the province, to be honest, starting with those with the highest number of young people, which we actually did a session, an in-person session in December, to identify people who might be interested in DSP. It's actually talking to those individuals and finding out who they are. So we have a series of in-person information sessions to see who might be interested in moving out. So there's sort of two pieces, moving the young people out, but also ensuring that nobody new moves in. And we have taken action on both of those.
Thank you. I recognize MLA LeBlanc with 1.5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you. Want to get some clarification on the coming into the DSP program. So, so when you say the new policy says that they have to go through the DSP program first, that means that because they're with DSP, then they would not ever be put into a long-term care facility because that is part of the policy, and that you would work with that individual to find them housing that works for them. Is that what you're saying?
I recognize E.D. Medioli.
Well, first of all, it's still a draft policy. It's with the DRC for review. So I can't say the final policy, but there is an assumption that we want to make sure everybody is aware of all their options and what's available through DSP. I would say that at the end of the day, we don't have the legislative authority should somebody know what all their options are and choose that they don't want to go with DSP. It's a voluntary program. We don't have that ability to say that they couldn't.
I recognize MLA LeBlanc.
But if they did, then that means their needs and housing options and all that would be taken care of.
Through DSP.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
It might be a
Sorry, I recognize E.D. Medioli.
Okay. It's the Italian in me. I get excited. Their support needs would be met through DSP, but often it's in partnership. So a lot of the individuals we talk about, it's back to what we were talking about. We need to collaborate with other partners, but yes.
And that is time. So we will move on to MLA Rankin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And what families are really worried about with the transition is gaps in implementation. So I would submit that government contributed to that worry with the proposed changes in the last budget, some of which have been changed back. The rationale behind them by many government members is the shift towards individual funding, but that model's not in place yet. So families are being asked to prepare for a system that doesn't exist yet. Will the department be moving forward with changes to core funding before the individualized funding model and its supports are fully implemented?
I recognize Deputy Beaton.
Yeah, thanks. I think I referenced it earlier, that we're committed to working with service providers as well as families and looking at what the impacts in terms of overall changes will be. I think you're specifically referencing day programs and block funding. And I would just go back to sort of say that we've been very communicative with our day program providers around what the changes were and how they were coming. Of course, this last budget round gives us time for reflection, and we'll take that back and look at how we move forward into the next budget cycle.
I recognize MLA Rankin.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, but we do have another budget with a massive reduction in funding, and we're still, this is year 4 of the 5 years, so I'm going to try to keep asking it in different ways. Has the government implemented the support and administration of the individualized funding model that is required by the remedy, given that we're in year 4 and year 5 is soon approaching?
I recognize Deputy Beaton.
Yeah, thanks. Without going into all of the details of how the individualized funding model will work, because it is very individualized, there's a banding structure that people will be assessed on in terms of where they fit. So that work is underway. But I also want to reiterate that we already have a number of programs where people are already receiving individualized supports, ILS, individualized funding supports already in community, but specific to the new individualized funding process. That's starting to roll out as we start to place individuals, and it'll be very specific on a case-by-case basis that will be done by our IPSCs. You've referenced, obviously there is financial challenges. I think we've seen that in the last budget round. The Minister of Finance has already articulated that there is to be more. Looking at what our fiscal responsibility is, and as public stewards of public funding, it'll be incumbent upon all departments to look at that. That'll be part of the budget process. But that is across all of government. All departments will be asked to be looking at those things. Particularly with DSP, I would just go back to reiterate historic investment and, over $180 million for the Remedy program, which would roll out individualized funding in this current fiscal year with a commitment on the 5-year timeline moving forward over year 4 and 5.
I recognize MLA Rankin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I am concerned about the complexity of certain cases. Some individuals need one-on-one care, and they really rely on specialized aid programs to be in place. And under the individual funding model, and I want to be specific with an example I'm hearing, is that they're hearing that an annual cap for funding could be around $12,000. So when you look at that amount and compare it to what they currently receive when they're looking at disability support programs, maybe you can shed some light to ensure that if that figure is accurate, and how was that calculated?
I recognize Deputy Beaton.
So if I can just pass it to Maria, but I first would say that figure is not accurate. It may be accurate for one of the bands, but it wouldn't be. There's an exception process. There's a whole complexity around the band process that I'll think Maria can maybe elaborate on.
I recognize E.D. Medioli.
Thank you. That figure, I don't know where that figure came from, and I'd be happy to share the actual funding bands because they're available. And the individualized funding is made up of 3 components. There's what we call the basics, which is food and shelter. There's special needs, which are those unique disability-related support needs that might be equipment or special diet. And then the largest portion is your support with your activities of daily living. That makes up about 80%. And so the funding bands that we're talking about are specifically on the supports budget. And there's 4 bands, and I believe it's Band A, which is the lowest level, but that maxes out at $25,000. Then the highest Band D maxes out at $120 a year, and then we can layer on additional funding, an additional $20,000 for medical supports, an additional $40,000 if there are behavioral support needs. And that is what can be approved by staff let's say as of right, just based on an individual's support needs. There is an exceptions policy. We recognize that there are individuals whose needs are even higher than that, and there is a process for approving that. The funding bands were designed to, we did a whole regression model, but to capture about 80% of individuals, and then we recognize that there's 20% who may require an exception, and there is a process for that. But like I said, I'd be happy to share those funding bands, and it does touch on there is a lot of misinformation out there. Even, I have to say, around the budget, I saw some very distressing videos on Facebook that were full of misinformation with, individuals saying, my loved one's individual budget is being cut by 50% and things like that. And so I guess I'm happy to share information that is factual. That might be helpful because I know you get a lot of questions from constituents.
I recognize MLA Rankin with 1.5 minutes.
Yeah, and I would say about the budget, it would have been helpful to have some information at the upfront that the minister could have come out and explained what changes were taking place, and so people were scrambling just to find out what information was happening. I mean, we went through days and then weeks of finding new information and new organizations that were impacted and not even communicated with until they had a letter saying that their funding has been cut across the board. So I think that's what happens when communication is not forthcoming from the government. Not anything to do with the people at this table, to be clear, but I think most Nova Scotians saw that whole budget exercise as a complete fiasco and had to be amended for the first time in our province's history. Maybe you can speak to what's happening with families that have pointed out that respite care alone can cost $25 to $30 an hour. how does the department expect families to meet real care needs with proposed funding levels? And this is, more burden the families are going to have to do in terms of managing and helping manage the finances and specialized coordinate care, navigate the services and all that stuff. How do they get increased funding to support in this new model?
I recognize E.D. Medioli with 10 seconds.
Okay, maybe we could take it offline. I think I have lots to share on that particular question, but I'd be happy.
That
Yeah.
time elapsed there. We move to the PC Caucus, and I recognize MLA Stoylov.
Thank you. You touched on this briefly, a number of you have previously. I just wanted to get more information in a bit more detail. And it has to do with the regional closure strategy and preparing individuals on the team with coordinating this. Can you speak to the size and scope of the whole closure strategy and what sort of work have they been doing?
I recognize E.D. Medioli.
So it's big. I think you may be aware we have 7 what are called ARCs, RRCs across the province that are closing, and their size varies from 20 participants to over 140. You might be familiar, that would be Sunset, Riverview, Kings. We also have what are called RCFs, or regional care facility, or residential care facilities. We have about 20 of those. Those are more like a boarding home setting with 15 to 25 participants. And generally, they would be individuals with a primary diagnosis of a chronic mental illness. And then we also have group homes and developmental residences, and they don't necessarily have to close, but we would have to decrease the occupancy to no more than 4 beds. So that's what we need to achieve. But again, I love to say this over and over again, we could close the institutions today, we could kick everybody out, close the doors, and they're closed. That's not why we're doing it, and that's a lesson from other jurisdictions who did that. And I won't name names, but ended up with large homeless populations, ended up with all kinds of challenges. And really, again, we're doing this because we genuinely believe, as does the DRC, the authors of the remedy, that they can have these individuals could have a better life in community. That's why we're doing it. So in terms of the closure process, it is honestly one person at a time. So they are assigned an individual planning and support coordinator, and we don't even start talking about moving. For the first 2 to 3 months, they get to know the person. And, a lot of these individuals haven't really had that opportunity to have somebody really get to know them and say, what's important to you? What are your dreams? And I think we have to remember that decision-making muscle hasn't been developed, because in an institution, you're told when to wake up, what to eat, when to go to bed, who you share your room with, when you're going to have a shower. So all of a sudden, you can't just introduce yourself on day one and say, so where would you like to live? So there's a getting to know you phase. There's an exploring phase. We call it life tasting, actually going out and trying different things, visiting communities, and then starting to develop that plan with the support network, of course, with people's family and the people that know these individuals best and love them. So you start to develop a plan, you try things out, and then you start to actually put the pieces in place. They understand what their funding band is, what their level of funding. They develop a proposal that we then ideally approve, and then we start to action the transition out. That's all supported by a community living facilitator. So, for example, if somebody's moving to a community and they have a particular interest, I always make it up and say maybe they like to work with animals, and they would love to volunteer at the SPCA, and for whatever reason that's not possible right now. So they would explore options. How do we make that accessible for this individual? And I don't mean just physically accessible, but just accessible as a program. And then often the transition, there's visits. You start to maybe 1 night, 2 night, et cetera. There's other components that we bring to bear that would include things like allied health supports, because again, some of those support needs are met in the institution, so we have to make sure those are in place. Those are just some of the considerations, but I really want to emphasize this. We're not making widgets. This is one person at a time, one individual at a time, and that's why it doesn't happen quickly, and that's why we can't create this system. This is what got us in this pickle in the first place, creating programs that were very boxed and said, well, if you live at home, you get flex, and this is the maximum you can have. And if you live in a small option home, it's 24/7, even if you don't need it. And we're trying to really find a way to support people in a way that reflects their individual wants and desires for an ordinary life. Nothing special, just what you and I have.
I recognize MLA Rushton.
Pass along to my colleague.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to pick up where I left off, Deputy, if that's all right. We discussed different partners with the assistance of this, and I know NSCC is Nova Scotia Community College is one of those partners who are playing a key role in educating the future workforce to enable the workforce to help with the steps to achieve the remedy. So, can you speak about or pass it off if need be, but also speak about how many seats will be graduating this year versus next year, and also what were the supports that are existing for the existing workforce that may be already out there that could better their education and their support abilities for the individuals.
I recognize E.D. Medioli.
Thank you. I hope I can cover it all because there's a lot. And to be honest, I can't remember the exact numbers because we have rolling numbers in terms of the NSCC Disability Support Program. So we've run several programs. There's the traditional 2-year program, and we've provided bursaries and funding. We piloted and are continuing to offer a 1-year program, which is a bit of a hybrid for people currently working in the field so they can do it part-time, mostly online. I think it was 75 bursaries to NSCC that we provided this year, but I mean, last year we provided, I believe it was 10 for the Behavior Interventionist program. So there's a variety of programs that are being offered through NSCC, but we're also revisiting the core competencies, so that will result in us, we want to redefine the core competencies for that role, so that will redefine the training. So we're going to continue with those, but the one I really want to talk about that I'm so excited about, it's a micro-credential that was developed in partnership with NSCC, and there's two, there's a 10-hour micro-credential for anybody, and anybody here could take it, and then there's a 25-hour, that's the second part, that's really mostly for people working in disability. But the key is it's about a human rights-based approach to supporting people with disabilities. So it really reflects the principles of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities with the remedy and with how we want to support people going forward. And so we've actually funded 1,300 positions in that micro-credential. So it's open to to members of the Disability Support Program, and we've also made it mandatory for the board chair and the executive director of all our service provider organizations, just so that we're all speaking the same language. I'm registered, I'm taking it in July. I just think it's a great opportunity in terms of how to bring people along. And that's just for this year that we funded 1,300. And actually, like, the seats are opening up sort of a cascading, but all the seats that are open now are full. So we'll be opening up more cohorts going forward. And yeah, I'm really excited. The feedback, the course was designed with First Voice, and they are actually some of the instructors in the course. So I just think I've previewed it, I haven't taken it, but I think it's an incredible opportunity. And that's just another example of how you're back to the workforce. Because the people currently working in the sector, especially those in institutional settings, I mean, that's the work that they've always done. So we need to support them. They are the people that have supported DSP participants, and they care about those participants. So we need to support them, though, in the move to the new world, because I'm sure it's a lot for them to get their heads around. We've also offered some not ad hoc, but there have been particular needs in the sector that have been identified by staff and service providers, things like a trauma-informed approach. So we've funded, I think, over 500 staff people to take that. We have a whole host of opportunities for safety training. And so those are just some examples. There's a lot happening in that workforce sphere.
I recognize MLA Timmins.
Thank you. I'm just going to open this up to the department, whoever feels that they can answer the question. School Leaver program that rolled out last year is being expanded this year. Could you speak of the importance of the programs like these and what they offer and what difference will we see in the next year term in terms of the program delivery?
I recognize E.D. Medioli.
So school leavers, again, was required in the remedy, but because it recognized a significant gap for young people with disabilities, as you may be aware, young people with disabilities, anybody, I guess, can stay in school until they're 21. The challenge was it was predominantly young people with disabilities because there was nowhere for them to go when they were graduating and all their peers were graduating. And part of it had to do with we had predetermined paths in the old world, and we didn't really challenge ourselves, I think, to support those young people and their families to imagine different and to start planning sooner and to set the expectation that they need to explore other options after school just like everybody else. So that's the genesis of the School Leaver program. And this year we did our first 100 cohort of 100 individuals, and they're supported by a local area coordinator. So this is almost like an addition to the transition planning that everybody else engages in the school system, but it's really to support people to imagine different, to explore, again, to do that life tasting, to say, what are you interested in, what would you like to explore, and bring that network together to make it happen. So we're just finishing up our first year now, and we're going to do a review, we call it a user experience review, to get that feedback about what worked and what didn't, and we're planning for our second cohort starting this fall. So that's happening as we speak, and I think we're going to need an ongoing evaluation because we're only going to have the first year information at the end of this year. But a part of that user experience review will include the local area coordinators, the families, the participants, et cetera, to get that feedback.
I recognize MLA McGowan.
And so this question is for anybody in the department who would like to take it on. So how is the department ensuring that individuals across all geographic areas have equitable access to support and the same opportunities for choice and independence? Making sure everybody gets the same. How are we doing that?
E.D. Medioli.
That's a really good question for Nova Scotia, you know, in terms of a province that has a significant rural population. And I will say I think the authors of the remedy recognize that. For starters, they established and required the regional hub model. So what the regional hub is, and we've established 4 regional hubs across the province, it's not like a central office. It's a service delivery framework that ensures that in each region there are certain components, services, and supports available that can then be delivered at the community level. So we have, you know, in each regional hub we have a team of IPSCs, so they're available to everybody across the province, local area coordinators, and a lot of them are embedded in rural communities. The formula for a local area coordinator is they should serve a population of about 15,000. So they can be they are embedded in local communities, and in fact, we're still working towards that, but they wouldn't be in an OSD office. We're working to find them spots in the municipal office or the school or the rec center, so they're really in community. Also available regionally and to be delivered are those allied health supports that can often be challenging. And at the end of the day, it's really about individualized funding. So that, again, a family in a rural community has that flexibility to use their funding in a way that maybe isn't traditional but works for them. There might be somebody they would like to employ in their local community who could support them locally. So that's why individualized funding provides that flexibility. We also have, we've established regional advisory councils, so that's one in each region. And these are advisory councils that provide advice to the disability support program, but they also provide local issues. They bring forward what's not working in our region and how can we address that. Those regional advisory councils are made up of at least 50% First Voice and have representation from community service providers, et cetera. And they have access to a fund so that they can pilot some local solutions to local problems. So they can bring forward and recommend, I mean, you know, I'm making it up, but it could be something around transportation, for example, in a rural area, and how could we pilot a solution to that particular issue? And there's funding available to do that. Those are just some examples.
Sorry, I recognize Emily McGowan with 1.5 minutes.
Well, yeah. And again, any member of the department that wants to take this on. So what feedback have you received from participants assessing individual funding? And how is their experience helping shape a model that supports greater choice and independence?
Okay. Sorry, I recognize E.D. Medioli.
I would like to start by saying, like, individualized funding is a generic term. So a lot of our programs are individualized funding now, because what that means is the amount of funding an individual receives is unique to their disability-related support needs, and the funding is attached to them. And they can make choices about how to spend that funding. So Flex at Home, for example, is an individualized funding program. But our new modern one, which will be the only program that we have, is just being rolled out now. So I would say it's a little early, but I would say that the preliminary feedback is that it gives that flexibility. That's what enables some of those examples that Laura gave for the individual to move out. Because right now in our residential settings, the funding's attached to the bed. So if you're dissatisfied with the services you're receiving, your only place to go in the old world would be back on the wait list. You can't take that funding that was allocated for you.
That is time. Want to thank members for their questions, and certainly our witnesses for a lot of really pertinent information today. We do want to provide the opportunity for closing comments. Ms. Carver, would you like to begin?
Thank you. So the remedy asks families, service providers, and communities to move beyond what has always been done and to imagine what's possible. People with intellectual disabilities have the same right as anyone else to live ordinary lives, to have a home, meaningful work, friendships, and a sense of real purpose. Real change happens when we stop measuring success by how well people fit into services and start measuring by how fully they belong in community. How will we know if the remedy is successful? Are people's lives better? Beyond their wildest imaginations now, beyond what we have allowed them to hope for. Ending institutionalization means more than just closing buildings or redesigning services. It means confronting the beliefs that have allowed exclusion to persist. When we replace institutional thinking with a vision of belonging, dignity, and choice, we create communities where people with disabilities are recognized not as clients or participants in a system, but as full citizens with the right to live ordinary, meaningful lives. Nova Scotia, as has been mentioned, is kind of last to transform their services. We're going from worst to first. The eyes of the disability community are on Nova Scotia right now. We're having this conversation in this room, in this province, and we think it's just us. It's not. The eyes of the disability community are on us nationally and internationally. This is an extraordinary moment in time, and we all have a responsibility for the success of this. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm reminded Dr. Stainton likes to speak of the slingshot, where you go from worst right up to the front. Deputy Beaton.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think I just pick up on that, just some brief comments, but I've had the opportunity to work in various departments across government over my time, and worked on with some really great stakeholders in various sectors, and a lot of great projects. But I have to say that the opportunity to play the role in advancing the remedy, as outlined by Ms. Carver, is really the opportunity as a career public servant of a lifetime, and happy to play a really small role in it, whatever that is. But opportunity to have such a profound impact on the lives of individuals for generations is really something that I'm proud to say that I'm supportive of with the Department of Opportunities and Social Development and with my colleagues. A huge testament for that goes out to those that work in the sector, the service providers, many of whom care deeply about their participants and the people that they support, as well as our staff on the front lines that are implementing this change. And I'd be remiss, and I don't get the opportunity to do it very often publicly, but I do have to comment on Maria, who is a champion and an innovator, and has the utmost respect of her colleagues across the sector and those that work in the disability field, who works tirelessly to implement the remedy. And I can tell you we're in good hands with her as the steward of driving this ship. So I did want to just put that on the record. So thank you. And I appreciate the opportunity here today to be able to answer your questions and provide some additional information about the disability transformation. Thank you.
Thank you again to all of the witnesses. We will take a 4-minute recess to give folks time to depart, but also we do have a bit of business yet to conclude. If I can ask committee members to please take their seats so that we can do a bit of business before the meeting wraps up, please. Thank you. I'll call the meeting back to order. We do have a couple of pieces of correspondence that have come in. First, from Associate Deputy Minister Nicole Johnson-Morrison. She had responded to a request for information from a prior committee regarding the numbers of individuals on income assistance without permanent residence. Is there any discussion on that submission? Okay. And a piece of correspondence from Ms. Adriana Smiley, who sent a letter regarding cuts. I do believe the letter preceded restoration of that funding, but is there any discussion on that piece of correspondence? Seeing none, the next meeting of the Standing Committee for Community Services will be June 2nd, and the topic at that time will be tenant rights under the Residential Tenancies Act, witnesses from Dalhousie Legal Aid Service, the Department of Service Nova Scotia Acorn, Nova Scotia Legal Aid, and Rental Housing Providers Nova Scotia. There being no other business, this meeting is adjourned.